Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ for the second Sunday of Lent from the Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud cast a shadow over them. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell prostrate and were very much afraid. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise, and do not be afraid." And when the disciples raised their eyes, they saw no one else but Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, "Do not tell the vision to anyone until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord. Perhaps many of us think that Jesus knew from the beginning just how things would turn out, and that every day he took out some blueprint or outline that told him what miracles to perform that day, what stories to tell. Of course, that was not the case. Jesus did not have some handbook on how to be a Messiah. Being human, just as we are, he too had to learn what each day would bring and respond to that, just as we do. When Jesus began to teach the disciples that the Son of Man would have to suffer many things, I doubt he learned that by the Holy Spirit tapping him on the shoulder and whispering in his ear. Jesus could see for himself that the power brokers were not at all happy about what he was preaching and doing. And he was a Jew. He knew his history, and that many of the great Jewish prophets had met persecution and an untimely death because the religious leaders had not approved of them. So it became pretty clear to Jesus that if he continued on this path, he would certainly clash with the Jewish authorities, and God knows what they might do. Oh yes, he would suffer many things, and a good deal more. Why is that important? It's important because this gives us another opportunity to see that the Gospels are not the private history of Jesus. Rather, they are the story of Jesus who is one like us in all things except sin. He had to discover the cost of carrying out God's will. And we too must discover the cost of carrying out God's will. The cost of being like Jesus. The cost of being his disciples. And we discover that cost only gradually as we live our lives. Those of you who are married, think back to your wedding day. Could you have predicted then everything you have gone through in your marriage? Of course not, and that's probably a good thing. You would likely have had second thoughts. In a similar way, none of us on the day of our baptism could foresee what that baptism would require from us. If we had, we might very well have turned away and said, "No, thanks. I'll choose something less demanding." So we discover during the course of our lives what it will cost us to be Christians. And with each new discovery, we must choose to do or not do that, just as Jesus did. The Transfiguration is about just such a discovery, just such a moment of choice. This is a rich story with much to teach us, more than time allows here. So, consider this seemingly unimportant detail. That cloud casting its shadow over them. In Scripture, the cloud is the symbol of the divine presence, the divine mystery that we cannot see into. So at those times when you cannot see what is happening in your life, or why, or what you are supposed to do next, and you think God is out to lunch again, perhaps it is because the presence of God has come over you, surrounded you, like a cloud. And all you need do is to relax in God's presence. And out of the cloud came the same words that were spoken at his baptism. This is my Son, the beloved one. At his baptism, Jesus declared himself ready to be God's Messiah. But now he knows more about what it will cost to do that. Jesus has come to a new level of readiness to match this new level of awareness. At his baptism, Jesus was ready in general, ready for the new creation, ready for the coming of the reign of God. In today's story, perhaps 2 years after his baptism, he knows that readiness demands something that was not understood at first. There's been a radical change. Now he knows that being faithful to God was going to mean suffering and even death. Jesus could see for himself that there had been a sharp turn away from the success and popularity he had enjoyed in the early days of his public ministry. God's ways, which used to be so obvious, had grown very mysterious. No wonder Luke, in his gospel, says that just before the Transfiguration, Jesus was in prayer, probably trying to sort it out with God. But in prayer, Jesus saw the light. And the light came from within him, not from outside. There's no mention of a heavenly spotlight. Nor is this story about having found a better laundry detergent. It is about the kind of thing that happens occasionally, not nearly often enough, in the classroom, when a student who has been struggling with a difficult idea for a long time finally gets it. The student's face beams, enlightened with a new awareness, a new insight, and perhaps even a bit of wisdom. Could that be what happened to Jesus? He had come to a new awareness, a new bit of wisdom. And so, as the Father said, listen to him. He is going to teach us. What had he discovered that he would now teach? He had discovered that in God's wisdom, salvation would come about not as humans do it, by piling up prayers or power or good deeds, but rather as God does it, by loving. Loving even to the point of self-sacrifice, which is the highest expression of loving. Suffering is not salvation. Loving is salvation. But as love deepens and matures, it leads to sacrifice. And that means suffering. You know that from your own choices to love. And love is always a choice, a decision, which may or may not bring with it good feelings. For example, those of you who are parents, have you ever found yourself awakened at about, 3 o'clock in the morning by a child who is immediately on the verge of reviewing everything he or she has eaten in the last 24 hours? Wasn't that a wonderful experience? I'm sure you rushed right in, calmed the child down, cleaned the child up, changed the bed sheets, changed the pajamas, got the child back to sleep, and then crossed your fingers hoping that it wouldn't all happen again 30 minutes from now. A wonderful memory. Of course not, but you did it. That is the nature of love, to do the loving thing and not count the cost. This is where we discover God's way in human history, that suffering, even suffering unto death, is the means by which life and love are given. That is how God brings about salvation. That is what Jesus would try to teach us, not just with his words, but with his life. This is a critical midlife discovery, an essential mid-course correction, the kind of thing that satellites sometimes have to do when they're on their way to a distant point, and they have to have a midlife course correction, or they wouldn't get there. For the person who does not make this discovery, the rest of the trip is off course. The meaning of life is the pull of the future, not the accomplishments of the past. Finding security in what God holds in the future, not in one's past successes, or for that matter, one's past failures. When this discovery is made, then faith begins to pull us on through life. And this discovery is crucial for faith, for it is the love of God calling us home. It enables us to find our treasure in the future and not in the past, and therefore changes one's attitude about life and aging and dying. We have two options about how to view the future, in fear or in faith. Whichever one you choose pretty much eliminates the other. You don't need them both. Can you imagine the difference it would make if we were no longer afraid of the future? As Martin Luther King Jr. put it in the speech he delivered in Memphis, Tennessee on the night before he was killed, "I've been to the mountaintop. I am no longer afraid." This transfiguration experience could happen to any of us in any of several ways. Perhaps being in the midst of a very successful career, but then being struck down with a serious illness or disabling injury. Perhaps having one or more normal, active, healthy children, and then being told that the child you are now expecting has some terrible medical condition. Perhaps building a home, starting a business, and seeing that destroyed by flood or fire or some other kind of disaster. Perhaps realizing after several years of marriage that your spouse is an alcoholic or has some other serious medical or psychological condition. Perhaps working 20 years for a company only to be laid off when that company is bought out by someone else. Anything like that could throw us into a time of real darkness. It's not what I expected. It's not what I thought I was getting into. It's not what I was ready for. Okay, but can I become ready now? Shall I live in self-pity the rest of my life? Or can I even imagine the possibility that precisely through those unforeseen circumstances, God is readying me for a new understanding of the meaning of my life? In the midst of this crisis, is God giving me is God giving me a new opportunity? Once again, we see that this is not just an event in the life of Jesus, it is an event in our lives as well. Every Christian will find that being a follower of Jesus will sometimes mean doing things and accepting things that you had never planned for. If you will open yourself to that and be ready to find God's will in that, then you too can share in this illumination. It might happen at that moment when you have your sheepskin, your career, your family, your prestige, and then wonder if this is all worth it. And you have to re-examine the meanings of your life. If you are open to God at that moment and ready to find God's will in those circumstances, you will discover that this is, in fact, a better way than the one you had planned yourself. It is seeing new opportunity, even joy and hope, right where everyone is saying there is no hope. It is moving from an attitude of saying to God, "You can make me do this, but I don't have to like it," to moving to finding promise rather than threat in whatever situations God has led us to in our lives. And what a difference that makes when we can find promise rather than threat. Thus, the Transfiguration represents for Jesus and for all of us who follow him the crucial moment of ongoing conversion, ongoing transformation. You see, baptism can take place in a few minutes on a Sunday afternoon in a church. But conversion, that takes a lifetime. A transfiguration experience calls us to let go of former plans, of former understandings, to take up a new understanding of God's will and God's way and God's love, and allowing God to lead us on. This is true freedom and true spirituality, being able to move with life as it is given by God, saying in effect, "Is this the way you want me to go? All right, Lord, I am ready. I am ready." This is living out our baptism. It is the readiness to find goodness in the face of mystery, in the face of weakness, even in the face of all that is implied by being over the hill. Everyone is a candidate for transfiguration. Has it occurred to you? Were you ready for it? If it were to occur now, for the first time or once again, would you be ready for it? If not, what's standing in the way? With apologies for my allergies today, I thank you for listening. Please feel free to share this with others and think about subscribing to this weekly gospel reflection, which you can do at our website, www.justanother.disciple.com. Once again, www.justanother.disciple.com. Thanks again.